Welcome to the Birth Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Kelly Hoff, BSN RN. I am a wife, a mother of two, and a nurse specializing in the care of women and newborns. In this podcast, we will share powerful journeys of birth givers with the goals of lifting the veil on the birth experience, healing through sharing, and beginning an open conversation to strengthen trust and promote transparency between birthing people and healthcare providers. Hello. Today I have with me Alex Wachelka, IBCLC. Alex is the mother of two and became a lactation consultant after her first was born. If you want to work with Alex, go to motherhoodbloomslactation.com. Today she is going to share her birth stories with us. Alex, welcome, and thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me, Kelly. I'm really happy to be here today.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear how you became a lactation consultant and what transpired that made you have that career choice.
Yes, it was definitely something I never expected would happen. And it all started with the birth of my first child. And he was born in 2019. So I was first-time mom. I prepared for labor and birth reading books. I wanted to have an unmedicated vaginal delivery. I surrounded myself with stories of other people who were able to do that. I learned about interventions and made my plan for how I wanted to bring him into the world. And where I lived at the time, I was under the care of midwives, and I had the opportunity to birth at their clinic. So sort of like a birth center, they had a birthing suite in their clinic. I knew that for me, I wasn't going to feel safe inside a hospital. And the only other option was home delivery. And as a first-time mom, home birth wasn't quite where I wanted to be. So I opted for their birthing suite. So while he arrived early, so it was a little unexpected how the events played out and how he was born. But my water broke actually at 39 and 5. I had woke up in the morning. I just had to go to the bathroom. And when I sat down to pee, when I think back, I swear I heard a little sound, a little pop, something inside. And I was like, that seems weird. And I just got up and I went about my day, but then there was like this dripping and leaking. And I was like, oh my gosh, does this mean my water broke? Like, I think my water broke. And I kind of let it go. And I went outside to my husband. I was like, I think my water broke. Very much as a first-time mom, you have, depending on how you prepare, we still have the aspect of media, and you have that vision of what you're shown as like that gush, like, oh my gosh. And then labor starts. And I just had this trickle and was like, I don't know. So we called the midwives. We went in, they said, yeah, come on in. No, they asked me a few questions. We go to see them. They confirm my water did break. I have no contractions. So I was like, well, okay, what do we do? And we waited out. So it was this process of waiting to see, try some things to bring on labor. I was walking on the treadmill, bouncing on the ball. I even got to a point at one point where I was using my breast pump to try and do nipple stimulation, get the oxytocin flowing, get contractions going, and nothing was really progressing. I wasn't really worried. My midwives were a really wonderful team. There was no induction pressure. There was no like, well, we are going to have to go to the hospital. It was very much assessed my situation, and it was still evidence-based, but I got to be fully informed in my decision-making. And I was like, we're waiting. I'm having this baby in the birth center. So that was at like 6 a.m. My water broke, and I did not have a contraction until 10:45 at night. And it was actually only after I had chatted with my midwives and we made the informed decision to use castor oil to get things going, because nothing was happening. And I was like, what is going on? This baby he was so comfortable, and I was ready to start labor because it had been so long since my water had broken. And so we went through the risks and benefits, made my informed decision, drank the castor oil. It was disgusting. And then it was still like 2 hours though. After that, nothing really happened. I was like, okay, he's not coming today. No problem. I'll just go to bed. And I was in bed for about 15 minutes, and I had a very strong contraction. And I was like, oh, okay, I can't lay down through this. I had to get up. And then the next one came, and I had to walk around. I couldn't lay down through these contractions, and I let them happen for about 30 minutes. And then I went to get my husband, and I said, I'm in labor, call the midwives. I couldn't even make a phone call to them. I think contractions were 5 or 7 7 minutes apart. Like they were getting closer, but like, well, it's not time to come yet. I was like, oh my gosh, no, I wanted to labor there instead of in my home. And then when they finally said that we could come in, it was probably about 2 hours I labored at home, trying to get out of our house into the truck to drive to the midwives was like, we had to take breaks because it was in between contractions. I was in active labor. I was someone who was also vomiting in labor. And we know that that pressure is good. It was dilating, was a very interesting experience. Like I was in the back seat of our truck and I just had a bowl and was like, oh my gosh. And I remember, I literally don't remember the drive to the midwives. I barely even remember getting into the midwives. I remember though, as soon as we got in, I dropped to my knees because I did a lot of my laboring on all fours. I dropped to my knees at the bench on their front step. I just put my head down and I remember my midwife's off to my side and all I hear is, well, this looks like active labor. And I was like, I told you it was active labor. And then their birthing suite was up a very steep set of stairs. When you walk in, it's reception. The clinic is upstairs. So it was like, okay, the contraction ended, go. And I made it to the top of the stairs and then I was like, okay, down again. The contractions would pull me down and because I was going to labor unmedicated. And so I was like, I would just drop to my hands and knees, go through another contraction. But then once we got there, I had their shower. So I used a lot of hydrotherapy. That was really wonderful. We filled up the tub. So I used hydrotherapy was so effective. It was something I did also when I had my second child. And I just would spend so much time in the shower. I would walk around. I'd go back to the tub. That's what I really loved about having the birth at the birth suite because I had that sort of freedom to move around as I needed to, change positions as I needed to. And I was progressing. Everything was going well. There were no issues, no complications. I spent transition in the shower, which I'm glad I did because I was throwing up again. And then finally came the time to push. And when I think back, I don't understand why I did what I did, but I guess I never fully understood how it was supposed to feel. And so I wasn't pushing like I was having a bowel movement. I thought I was bearing down, but I was like recruiting other muscles and I was like so sore and it just wasn't, when I think back, especially when I compare it to birth number 2, it just feels like it was very unnatural, but I didn't really know. And I thought I had prepared. And because of that, it took a long time. I spent 3 hours pushing. So my active labor was only from the time those contractions started to pushing was 8 hours. And so first time mom, that's not bad. But then pushing was 3 hours because I wasn't doing it right. It is what it is. There was a lot of coaching also of like, okay, and now push. And I always felt like there was a bit of a delay. Like I could feel it in my body. And I was like, no, you're saying now, but I need like 3 more seconds before it's truly the moment to push. And so I think that kind of threw things off a little bit. Ultimately, I had to get out of the tub. I had no intentions of having him be born in water. It was just like, if it happens, it happens. I love the water for managing the pain. And the midwives said, it's probably going to be best if you can get out of the water onto the bed. And I think he was almost crowning at that point. I was like, I don't think I can. So they helped me get out. And I remember I sat on the bed and I was almost crowning. So there was pressure. My perineum, was stretching. And I was like, I thought I don't know why. I thought that I had like sat on him. I was like, oh my gosh, I thought his head was out and he was not born, but I think it was like the pressure. And I was like, so then I was like panicking and I just labored for like 9 hours. I was like, please sit on him. And they're like, no. And then literally it was like one push, his head was born, one push, his body came out. And I was like, okay, we should have got out of the tub a long time ago. So ultimately we did have to use that natural augmentation of the castor oil, but I was still able to have the unmedicated vaginal delivery that I had hoped for. And because of that, there was no interruptions between our skin to skin time and that initial latch. And we got to just hang out, the 3 of us as this brand new family. Like the midwives did their check and then they just go and chart. They spent time in the other room. So we're just laying on this queen size bed in this room that kind of looks like it's your own home. So it was just a really comfortable experience. It was nice to be just like laying in a bed like that after laboring so long at night. Cause from water breaking, it was a very long time. It was like 28 hours from water breaking to birth, but the labor itself was 9 hours. So I was tired still. And it was nice to be able to spend that golden hour together and have him be skin to skin on my body. And one of the things though that I did was I didn't get to have the breast crawl where we have that natural, babies have their instincts and reflexes and they just sort of creep and crawl up to the breast to have their first latch. And it was only because I think I felt like he had to latch right away when I know now that that doesn't have to happen. And so I had just brought him to my breast to have his first latch. And because I had used the pump during labor to try and stimulate the oxytocin to flow, I remember the midwife said, "How does that feel?" I was like, "Oh my gosh, it's way stronger than the pump." Meanwhile, I didn't realize what was about to happen is that what I thought was strength was actually him just clamping right down on the nipple because he had a shallow latch. And, the next 24 hours of cluster feeding was ahead of me. And then that's when everything just changed dramatically. But I had thought it was a cool moment. It didn't really hurt, but I was like, oh, wow, it feels so much different than using the breast pump. And so with the midwives in the birthing center, because everything was fine, we are discharged after 3 hours and then you just head home. And then it was, okay, well, now we're parents. I guess what do we do now? So it was just a lot of relaxing and then feeding my baby when he cued that he was hungry. And it was probably the next day because we got home about 1:00 in the afternoon. He was born around just after 9 a.m., 3 hours at the midwives. We were home in the early afternoon and it was a long day for him too. The birthing process is a lot for both. And my baby was tired. So he was probably only cueing to feed every 2 or 3 hours. That sort of standard that you hear, which really doesn't happen much beyond maybe that first day of birth. So things felt okay. It was really when the first night came and then the second night came where the cluster feeding started. And then I was realizing that something had to be wrong because his latch was so painful. I didn't even want him on my body. I didn't want to bring him to my body. I would bring my shoulders to my ears, hold my breath, tense up because I couldn't do it. It was painful. It was causing damage. But as much as I had thought that I had prepared ahead of time by reading stories and understanding, I did actually take a prenatal breastfeeding class, but I took it way too late. I was 38 weeks pregnant and I sat through the whole class with Braxton Hicks. So I did not pay attention and I will admit that. So then when the time came, all I knew was I was in pain and this shouldn't be right. There was actually one night where he was cluster feeding and I would do everything I possibly could to postpone the feeding, push it back. That can reduce milk supply. I didn't know that. And I was like, he can wait a little bit longer, a little bit longer, a little bit longer. Then he had brick dust urine. So he had that dark yellow or that dark orange urine that's not supposed to happen past day 3. It was day 7. And I knew that that was a red flag. I didn't realize that it was my doing from the night before of not wanting him to cluster feed. And so we went back to the midwives and then it sort of, this whole thing kind of snowballed into then going to the IBCLC at the public health unit, them immediately telling me he needed to be on formula. My heart was broken. I asked about donor milk. They said, no, that's not a thing. It's just for sick babies in the NICU. You can't access donor milk. And it was very much like he nursed, they weighed him and then it was oh, he needs to eat. Can we give him formula? I was like, there's no informed decision making. We weren't really on the same page. When I say we, I mean myself and the lactation consultant. The midwives were helpful. They helped me learn how to do tube feeding, to give him the opportunity he needed to eat, but also to allow my body time to heal because I was experiencing excruciating pain and damage. And I remember actually when I first called the public health unit, I said, it hurts when he's breastfeeding. And they said, oh, well, that's normal. And I just broke down into tears. I was like, there's no way this is normal. You don't understand. When I say this hurts, you're not listening to me. Well, it should after a few seconds, the pain should go away. And I was like, no, it's continuous. It's not normal. And that's something that drives me crazy now as an IBCLC because stop telling moms it's normal. It's not normal. And so I ended up at public health with the IBCLC and we were not on the same page. I knew I could do this. I had this deep desire to breastfeed my baby. I don't really know why, because I didn't really see it growing up. My sisters and I were breastfed for a short period of time. My mom had a lot of challenges. I just knew. I was like, I'm breastfeeding this baby. I'm supposed to breastfeed this baby. Just show me how to do it. And there was a lot of, well, your body's not going to be able to keep up with him. And we weren't on the same page. I didn't have the support that I felt that I should have. Ultimately, she did help find the root cause. And the root cause was a posterior tongue tie and a lip tie. That was why his latch was so shallow and so damaging, because he physically couldn't draw the nipple to where it needed to be in his mouth. So I am grateful that that was discovered, because we had that resolved. We worked on those issues, and then honestly, the rest was up to me. But I was able to wean him off of formula by 10 weeks and then exclusively breastfeed him until he was 17 months old. But it was those first 6 weeks where it can be some of like the hardest time, but it was those first 6 weeks where no one was listening. They heard the words I was saying, but they weren't listening. So the support just wasn't there. We weren't on the same page. And because of that, while they discovered the root cause and we addressed that, there was still a lot I had to do on my own. I had to bring up my milk supply. I had to figure out how to wean off of formula. I had to stop using bottles and tubes and have him at breast. And to do that, I do what most moms do, and I went on the internet. But because I think because my background is in nutrition, and I knew how to find PubMed articles and things like that. So I knew like where to go. It was still a ton of information. I was still confused. But because of that, I found, instead of just reading blogs, I was actually taking webinars from IBCLCs, from like the International Breastfeeding Center in Toronto. Like I was doing these things just to learn for myself so that I can figure out how to breastfeed this child. I just wanted to nurse him. And then through that process, I was getting so much more into it. I was always really into like the human body and biology and science. And that part was really interesting, that we grow this baby and now our body just automatically makes food for them. And now we just keep growing them, but they're on the outside of our body. Like it was really cool to me. And then also I thought, that's not okay what I just went through. Moms should not have to go through what I just went through. Why should they not be listened to? Why shouldn't their feelings be validated? That's not okay. And the more that I had these thoughts in my head as I was learning, I was like, I want to do this. I want to become a lactation consultant. And I was 4 months postpartum, and the opportunity to start the education portion and learning more about the lactation physiology and that aspect came up, and I took it. I was on mat leave with my son. There was no guarantee of the job I left was even going to be there. So I said to my husband, I think this is what I want to do.
Are you pregnant and planning a hospital birth? You don't need a birth plan. You need a birth vision. In my opinion, birth plans set you up for failure. Yep, I said it. Hear me out before you turn off this podcast. You may think that by downloading a generic birth plan, it means you're in control. The truth is, it's not that simple. No one can control exactly how their birth will go. There are way too many variables. What every pregnant person wants is to walk into the hospital pregnant and to walk out with a healthy newborn in their arms. The journey in between is the murky part. It's hard to know what issues might come up that need to be addressed. If you focus your energy on a birth vision rather than giving your power to a birth plan, you can empower yourself to make the best choices for you and your baby. That's why you need to get into my Empowered Hospital Birth program. As a labor nurse and mindset coach, I can help guide you through the process of maintaining the calm autonomy that will help you achieve the birth vision you desire. In my Empowered Hospital Birth program, I will help you identify the source of anxiety you have surrounding hospital birth, fill in knowledge gaps to make sure that you are fully informed and confident, learn key phrases so you can better communicate with your medical team, emotionally process your fears so that they don't hold power over you. Go to kellyhoff.com/empowered to book a free 30-minute private birth vision call, where we will identify your top fears and must-haves and gain clarity on exactly how you want to feel in the birth space. That's KELLYHOF.com/empowered. I'm honored to be a part of your birth journey.
He was like, okay. And so, yeah, at 4 months postpartum, I started the process. It took several years, but that's when I started the process. And it was through my experience with my firstborn and the education of becoming a lactation consultant that I did things differently for baby number 2. And the biggest thing that I did as far as preparation went is for labor, I actually did hypnobirthing this time. I was able to have the unmedicated birth that I wanted. I just wanted another tool just because the experience could look very different. We were having a home birth with our second, and that was the main thing that I did differently was hypnobirthing. And it made such a difference, I think, because this baby, again, water broke, but this time labor started right away, less than 10 minutes, contraction came, and then they just ramped up so fast. From water breaking to birth was 3 hours. The midwives barely got there in time. They're like, Alex, if you have any more kids, don't leave your house. It was fast. And I do believe, I think the hypnotherapy had something to do with that because I just had a different mindset. And, he was born in like 2 pushes, not 3 hours of pushing. It was, I knew what I was doing and I just had more trust in my body. And so that was something that I did different for labor. But one thing that I did different prenatally for the breastfeeding aspect was to collect my colostrum before he was born, because I knew if my first was tongue-tied, there's a genetic link. There was a high possibility that my second would be tongue-tied as well. At that point, I could do the one, I could assess it myself. I was like a month away from writing the board exam to be an IBCLC. And so I was like, I'm going to collect colostrum. And it was super cool. I'm going to nerd out on that as a lactation consultant because your body makes milk before your baby's born. And this is something that also we as women aren't really educated about properly because we have this milk coming in. And I've even consciously chosen my words when I teach prenatal classes because your milk's already there. It's just transitioning. The volume's going up. It's moving from colostrum to mature milk. It's already there. 16 to 20 weeks, your body's making it. So I was like, I'm going to collect colostrum because if this baby has a tongue tie and if this baby can't latch well, I'm not going to grin and bear it. I'm not going to suck it up and tough it out because I know breastfeeding is not supposed to be painful. So I'm going to have a plan in place. And that plan is to harvest my own colostrum so that I don't have to supplement him with formula, so that if he can't be at the breast, I have some supplement to give him while I then pump and hand express and finger feed and do all those same things again before we get the tongue tie released. But collecting colostrum is something that I would really encourage, especially if you know that there are potential challenges ahead. And for me, I knew that there was a potential challenge. So at 36 and a half weeks, I started collecting colostrum, and it's just a really simple process of hand expression. And, you're just collecting a few drops. Like it's really very minimal amounts because there's no baby to feed yet. So your body's not going to produce in large volumes. But I remember the first time that I did that, even though I knew colostrum was going to come out, I'm, a lactation consultant. I was just like, this is like, my body's already making milk. Like it was so validating. I was like, I can do this again. My body can feed another baby. I can do it. I'm making milk already. And then collecting that colostrum, I just saved it in syringes. We had it in the freezer. I actually used it because he was born with a posterior tongue tie and a lip tie. And just like his brother, latching was uncomfortable. It wasn't the same level of pain because I was actually better skilled. Breastfeeding is a learned skill. I was better this time around for multiple reasons, but I could better position him at the breast to get a deeper latch. It was still only so good. There was limitations because of the oral dysfunction that he had, but I was then able to feed him with the syringe, the colostrum, hand express, remove milk on my own, and essentially ensure that he got enough milk. I protected my supply, nursed him on and off, pumping versus nursing, finger feeding, until we could then do all of the prep work and then the release for the tongue tie. So it made a significant difference because I don't even know if I could think of the hypothetical of like, if I didn't become a lactation consultant, what would have happened with baby number 2? Because I know I'm supposed to be here. So it's hard to think of, well, what would have happened? But I probably would have had a similar experience of this hurts. Maybe it's a tongue tie, but not have that piece at the beginning of protecting my milk supply and knowing how to do hand expression and collect this colostrum to essentially save my breastfeeding journey before it even started. So it just all goes back to the very first experience I had becoming a mom and feeding a baby.
That's so interesting. So I was a nurse with my first, a postpartum nurse, and I'd just done the Gold Lactation Conference, and they talked about collecting breast milk and how that helped with, I think it was people with gestational diabetes.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, let me see if I could do that. Because at the hospital that I worked at, they were pretty strict about, how much weight loss could happen before you had to have formula supplementation. And there was no option for donor breast milk. And so I was like, well, I know that I can pump and it could potentially help me go into labor too. So I used the hand pump. I didn't hand express. I got 8 ounces and froze them.
Wow.
And I brought them to the hospital, and both my kids were real slow to latch the first 24 hours. With my daughter, I used that time to have the nurses help my husband learn how to breastfeed, and while I pumped, just to collect more milk and keep my supply up. And then at home, when it got too sore for her to breastfeed, which later I found out she had a lip tie. I thought she did, but nobody was validating that until a dentist, like 2 years later, was like, oh yeah, that's a lip tie that receded. I can see where you had that. Yeah. And her top lip would curl under when she breastfed. So it felt like it just sent chills throughout my whole body every time she latched. And I mean, eventually it would be less painful, but that first initial, when she's trying to get on, it was rough. And then with my son, again, he was very sleepy and he had a milder lip tie, which receded eventually. But those first 24 hours, which is what I often tell new moms to do now when their kids are having a difficult latch, I just would hand express and just had him lick it off the breast. And my nurse would come in and be like, so how long did you feed? And I would be like, oh, well, he didn't want to latch again. So I just hand expressed and he licked about 300 drops off. They were like, what? Second baby, it's like a vacation. I was just in the hospital watching movies, eating the free food and hand expressing. I was like, I got nothing else to do. Yeah. Which I might as well just hang out with this kid. And it really doesn't take that long, honestly. And they say, I don't know what the recommendation is now, but they used to say 12 to 20 drops is a meal for the hand expressing.
Yeah, it's because it's really only about 5 mils.
Right.
So that's their first meal. It's like 5 to 7 mils. We're talking like 1 teaspoon.
Exactly. Yeah. So then it just goes up the next day. It's like, isn't it like 7 to 15? I don't remember. I just hand out the paper. Yeah. And then I'm like, okay, how much, how much did you pump or how much did you feed? But yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be so complicated. And I remember the same, even though I was a healthcare provider and I taught moms how to breastfeed, I felt kind of lost. And even my second time, I have friends that are lactation consultants and they were like getting texts from me all the time because you need support. And it baffles me that there's not a good central place for that ongoing support for moms, especially moms that may not have the resources to hire someone. I mean, I know at the hospital we have lactation consultants in a hotline, but it's hard for the lactation consultants even to get to the patient. And when they do, it's like they're on to the next very quickly. They do what they can. Just so, just like nurses are doing what we can, we go in there and help latch. And then we have to move on and give medications and, do all the other stuff. So it stinks that we don't have better resources. So I'm so glad that you have made that career change and are providing that resource for people.
Thank you. Yeah, it's something that I hear a lot from people who have, older children. They've had a breastfeeding experience, or even if it was 30 years ago, like you don't forget. So many people will say, where were you 10 years ago? Or where were you when I needed you? Yeah. I wish I knew about you X amount of years ago. And it's not, my colleagues hear this too. All over the world, IBCLC is like, we're told this from someone because the support, it's still lacking. And I am so glad you just said what you said, because it's something that I try and share with my clients prenatally, is that some hospitals have the staff, some don't. And those that do have the staff, the time isn't there. There isn't, there's only one lactation consultant. And then, the nursing staff have some extra education. But then you just said, you guys are pulled in all different directions. There's more. You can see someone for a very short period of time. And we both know that might not be enough time, especially if things are feeling a little unnatural, which it's normal because it's something you have to learn how to do. And if they come in and they only check one latch and you weren't even sure about it, now you're at home to try and figure it out by yourself. So it is something that I try to share that message, because I think a lot of people think like, oh, the hospital can help me. They want to, but sometimes the resources aren't there. The people aren't there, or they can't be with you for the time that you need them to be with you for, which is not, that's a system issue. Like
an entire healthcare system issue in this country, not just one system. And insurance and the way that we bill and all those things, that makes it impossible in this country for that support, or it's just not programmed in. It should be part of the postpartum care, just like more follow-ups for perinatal mental health, more follow-ups for making sure that we're breastfeeding with someone that is skilled to diagnose the issues like a tongue tie and a lip tie that doesn't just brush them aside. Because I had a lot of people that were like, oh, no, it's not a big deal, and then on top of that, have somebody 24 hours a day that can be on call to try to help with feeding, because feeding doesn't just happen during the day. And some of the most frustrating feeding times are in the middle of the night. We could have so much better support in this country. And it's not like the funds aren't there. It's just the willingness, I think. So you actually probably answered this question, but I'll ask it anyway, in case there's something else that you would want to say. I ask everybody this. If you could go back and talk to yourself before this whole experience, what would you want to tell yourself? Even if it's just like reassurance.
That's a really great question. Probably to just continue to trust myself and my instincts. And it's something that I tell all moms that I work with, because they're there for a reason. Whether you truly know what the issue is, I've yet, in 2 years of doing this, I've yet to meet a mom who has said, I feel like something's off, or I feel like this is the issue, and she has been wrong. Like, they're right every single time. Whether it's truly what the issue is, or we find, there's a different root cause. When a mom says, so-and-so said it's fine, but I think it's this, or I think something's wrong, they are right. And I think part of me as a brand new mom was hearing, well, your body's not going to keep up with him as he gets older, and thinking, that's not right. I know I can do it. I'll figure it out myself then. Or like, oh no, the pain is normal. Well, no, you know what? There's no way this is normal. How have people breastfed children since humans existed if this is what they're feeling? And I think that's what I probably just try and reinforce that message to myself. I'll keep listening to yourself, because your instincts are there for a reason. They're telling you something. You might not know exactly what they are, but they're telling you something. So follow them. And I probably could have got breastfeeding help a little bit sooner and not experienced so much damage, because I thought this isn't normal. But then I had society's idea of like, oh yeah, it's fine. It's normal. Push on through. Let them toughen up. Like all this misinformation. I was like, okay, it drowned out what I truly felt inside was, this can't be normal. So I would just reinforce that to myself.
Well, and I feel like we medicalize everything nowadays. And there is this innate ability to birth and feed a baby that just needs to be supported. And, I'm a nurse and I do medical interventions, and I'm grateful for them when they're needed. But there's a lot that can just go ahead and happen a lot of the time. And having to push formula on someone that doesn't want it. Now, if somebody wants formula, perfect. If that's how you want to feed your baby, good. That's there for you. But if somebody wants to breastfeed, it's equally important to have that support and to use the formula when medically necessary. And I think anymore now, there's more and more good options for donor milk. But if you have your own milk, even better. You mentioned the pushing was different for your second. Do you know what you did differently? Were there different muscles? Because I remember with my first, I did Pilates, and I kind of had learned to pull in and pull up, maintain my core muscles, and to push out was weird. So most new moms, it does take them a little time to figure that out. What do you think was different with the second? Or was it just like your baby was coming?
Partially that he was in a rush, but I think also it had to do with the hypnobirthing. So I read the Mongan method. So I read the book, and it was very much the part around breathing techniques. And it was you taking a deep breath in, and then as you exhale, it's forcing the breath to the back of your throat and down your spine, and then coming down into your pelvis, and then imagine it coming like out and up, like curving like a J, I think is how they described it. And it was like, practice this when you poop. Practice this for bowel movements, because it's very similar. And so that's what I literally would practice, and was like, okay, that's how I do it. That's how I do it. And then when I was ready to push with my second, I think it just felt different, partially because of that. But then also I knew the experience of like, well, it kind of does feel similar to, it's not the same as a bowel movement, but like the pressure, like where you're feeling the pressure, it's in that same area. And I was like, the first time I was kind of doing, just weird sort of pushing, but like pulling in my core. I can't even describe it. But with my second, it was like, I just allowed my body to relax and open. And I just did that deep breathing and that lowered him. And then when I was actually crowning, I just paused and was like, just deep breaths. And I just like paused. I wasn't trying to push down or bear down or anything. I was just allowing myself to naturally open so he could be born. And then that was when the midwives came in because they were still trying to get set up. And I was like, I'm crowning. Like I was in the shower using the hydrotherapy again. And I was like, I just called her. I knew I was crowning, but I could feel his head. And I was like, I'm crowning. She's like frantically comes in. And then this part kind of bugged me because then she turned the lights on and I had the lights off. We just had like candles, like trying to set the low lights to have the delivery that I wanted. So she just like shuts my water off, turns the bright lights on, like way to like throw off my oxytocin. But I was crowning at that point. And then because I had paused, I had repositioned my body. Because I was again laboring on all fours. I had kind of come up to my knees and then she was like, no, move your body this way. Like, okay, turn here. Like, cause she just didn't have the visual she needed, but I was like, he's coming. But then that's when once she kind of did that and she was like, okay, she's like, this is what I really love. She said, push how you feel you need to. And with my first midwives, it was like, okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, push, hold. Like, it was like coach pushing and I didn't like that. I ended up with broken blood vessels in my face. I had a different midwife because we lived in a different city actually. So totally different team, different care. And that was one thing I told her in my postpartum checkups. I was like, you know what? The one thing that I really appreciate that you said to me that I will forever remember is push how you feel you need to. Because I didn't want to be coached again. I was like, my body can do this. And then so when she said that, I was like, okay, here we go. And then that's when I used that breathing technique. It was like, boom, his head was born. And then I did one more and then he was born. And I was like, okay, I think I kind of listened to my body a little bit more and fully allowed myself to feel the sensations, like where they're supposed to be. Because with my first, I was in water with my first. So I would float a bit and then I couldn't have the proper push. And then I was like, okay, then that's when they said, just get out, go on the bed. And then it took 2 pushes.
Time for gravity to take over. Yeah, there's a place for coach pushing when somebody just clearly doesn't know, especially if you can't feel. You know, we do a lot of coach pushing with people that have epidurals. And it's appropriate if they can't feel anything. But if they can feel it, then we usually say, okay, wait for that contraction to build. And then when you feel like you could push, then go ahead and use that force. Yeah. And then I love the visualization. I'm going to have to find that. I haven't read up on hypnobirthing, but I have friends that have done it and really liked it. But it's funny because that's kind of similar to how I tell people to push, to kind of have that J formation that they're kind of thinking, because the baby has to come down and out. Yeah. It has to curve back against your sacrum and then come up and out. When I'm pushing, if I'm in there for a while with a patient, I'll try to feel where the baby's head is in the body. And I'll say, okay, now you need to push down. And then when the baby comes down and up and pops underneath the pubic bone, then we'll be ready. And that always helps. But I really like that J visualization. I'll have to get that and have my patients read that, because I think another visualization I do is I'll say, envision your pubic bone to your belly button and just try to curl around that space and shorten it, but really focus on that being your power. That's where you're pushing. But also your baby's head has to come down and out. So as far as coach pushing, those are the things that I say. But unless they just have no proprioception at that point, then I might say, okay, take a deep breath, blow out a little, and then push at this time, because I can feel the contraction. There's so much that our bodies can tell us. And if you're in tune with your body, it's so much better to just go with what mom's feeling. Mm-hmm. So was there anything else that you wanted to talk about that you did such a good job of covering everything that I normally have moms cover in their birth story? The only thing I didn't ask, I guess, is the postpartum experience other than the breastfeeding and that career change. I guess, how did that look for you? Did you go back to your old job and for a little bit?
No. So I live in Canada and that meant with the job that I had the opportunity to have 12 months of maternity leave. I just barely made it though. The way that the Social Security works is you have to have a certain number of hours work for that employer before you can take advantage of the maternity leave. And I was able to just come in over the amount of hours needed. And I had to actually push them for it. Otherwise, we were looking at zero income from, well, just my husband. So the mat leave was in place. But that job was just a contract position. I was doing something in nutrition. So my first career was in nutrition in the health and wellness industry. I spent time working for health food stores and supplements. And at the point when I left, I was in an education role for a supplement company. And it was just a contract. There was no guarantee that the job even existed. So I kind of already had this idea of like, I have to find something else anyways, but I have a year to figure that out. And then where we lived was very far away from family. We had actually recently moved because of my husband's job, and we were a 5-hour drive from family. So I was doing the postpartum period alone. We were in a brand new city, brand new neighbors. Our family wasn't there. My husband took a vacation time for 1 week, then he went back to work. So it was me and our baby 24/7. And it was really hard. I thought I prepared and I really wasn't. It was exhausting, emotionally, really difficult. Then add on breastfeeding challenges. I mean, my physical recovery was pretty easy because there were no major complications from my vaginal delivery. I didn't even have a tear. I had like a scrape, they called it. Very simple, like healed up real quick. So I didn't have any challenges there. It was more just about physically being a mom. My body needed to feed my baby and, we were having a hard time. And then the sort of the isolation, and postpartum and breastfeeding is already isolating, but then to physically be isolated from family. And then I should add 4 months after I gave birth was March 2020. So then that adds more isolation. Everything was in full on lockdown and we weren't going to see anyone, which is also how that opportunity to start my school, the education portion for lactation came up, because the course, that part was going to run online. And I was like, well, we're at home anyways. So yeah, it was always just, I had in the back of my mind, I had to find another job anyways. And then it was like, this is what it's going to be. And honestly, in my old career, I know that this is like a little off topic, but I would have this like little voice in my head that was like when you have a baby, you'll have the answer. And he said, how am I supposed to know what I'm supposed to do with my life when I have a baby? That's years away. And then it all happened. And I was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
The course of events.
That's another maternal instinct, and you do. That's so amazing. Was there anything else that we didn't touch on that you wanted to talk about?
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. That was so interesting. I love how you managed to figure it out and turn it into a whole career. And anybody that wants to contact you, it's motherhoodbloomslactation.com. Now, can people that are not in Canada contact you and work with you as well?
Yes. Yeah.
Amazing.
Virtual work.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning into my podcast. If you enjoyed what you heard, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on future episodes. Don't forget to share the podcast with a friend who can benefit from the valuable insights that we share here. And if you could take a moment to leave a 5-star rating and review, it would mean the world to me. If you're ready to work one-on-one with me to embark on a transformational journey towards a confident and empowered hospital birth experience, go to kellyhoff.com/empowered and enroll in my Empowered Hospital Birth Coaching Program. Together, we'll create a roadmap to a birth experience that you'll cherish forever. That's KELLYHOF.com/empowered. Let's make your birth experience extraordinary.